Hotel employees, what's the most shocking thing you've witnessed on the job? Posted this before. I have a friend that owns a small motel just off a highway. I would hang out with him and chat on some late nights. One night, he got a call that one of the guests heard a loud crash in the room next door, checked the computer, and saw that the room was unoccupied. Friend and I go to check it out. We knock, and there is no answer. He opens the door, and there was a cat in the room. It knocked over a lamp and smashed it. It was super friendly and came right to us. We took it back to the office and looked at the room records. The prior person that was in the room abandoned the cat when he checked out 3 days earlier. He was already on the other side of the country when we called him, and he said he was not coming back for the cat. My friend took ownership of the cat, and now she is the motel cat. She walks all around the property and takes care of any mice or critters. She even has her picture on the wall as one of the employees. Not sure why the maid service did not see it when the room was being cleaned. We think that the vacuum scared the cat, and she hid somewhere. Still was a penis move of the old owner to leave the cat behind. Story 2. Not me, but my previous housekeeping manager once entered a room to discover that the man in the room had blasted his brains out all over the wall. She ran to the bathroom to throw up in the sink, then looked up and saw in the reflection of the mirror the dismembered and beheaded body of a young girl in the bathtub. Turns out it was his daughter. It's a given that if you stay in the industry long enough, you'll eventually see a dead body. During my time in hotels, I heard a few dead body stories, but that was the absolute worst. I didn't stay in the industry long enough. My personal stories are pretty weird, but nobody ever died. Story 3. We had an older man, 50s-ish, checked in with a teenager. Didn't think anything of it. Fathers and daughters check in all the time. About 11:30, the police arrive, and it turned out it was a teacher and his 13-year-old student. Story 4. Parents abandoned their 5 kids for like a week. The oldest son, who was obviously stressed and no older than 14, came to the front desk and begged for food. Once they ran out of the snacks their dumbass parents left them. Cops were called. Story 5. When I worked as a security guard at a motel, I saw 3 people on go onto the roof of the motel, and one guy dropped to his knees, while the other 2 pointed guns at his head like they were about to execute the guy on the roof. So we called the cops, and the 3 of them went back inside before the cops showed up. So they went into the hotel room to see what was going on, and the idiots were shooting an amateur movie and used our motel as a set without asking. The guns they had were toy guns with the orange tips electrical taped black. Story 6. One Saturday night, this team of youth soccer players and 6 or 7 adults checked into a room block on the 4th floor. The last room on the block consisted of a few of the soccer kids, and it was next to this old Russian guy who had been there for a couple of weeks on a business trip. On one of my security rounds at about 1 a.m., I heard very loud prawn playing in the old guy's room. Like, you could hear it by the elevators. I knocked on the door and asked him to turn it down, and he did. Went back downstairs, and a half hour later, one of the chaperones of the team called and said the man was still listening to loud prawn, and the kids started complaining. So, just as before, I went upstairs and knocked. This time, I told him he would need to keep his TV down or we'd need to ask him to leave. So, he apologized again and told me it wouldn't happen again. A little while later, I did a security round, and there was a commotion near the room block. Turned the corner and one of the adults was pounding on the old guy's door, and I asked what was going on. The dad said he could still hear the prawn through his door, and he wasn't going to back down until the old guy came out because his kids were next door. I told them to go back to their rooms, and after 5 minutes, they finally did. I went back downstairs, and while I was asking my manager about what we should do, he said we should wait and monitor the situation. Shortly after, a person who was in the room next to the block came to get a snack, and we asked him if he heard any noise coming from the old guy. And he said that since we came knocking the second time, he could no longer hear prawn, but he did hear the dad come roaring out of his room before pounding on his door. At this point, I agreed to post up by the block for a while. Eventually, the old guy exited his room, and all of a sudden, the adults must have heard his door open because one of the men flew out of it and started shoving the old guy. I went to break it up and he said stay out of it. He was going to deal with this pervert. Then out came all the kids and adults. One of the women was now smacking the old guy, and the kids were rambunctious. I called the police and told everyone to stop, but they completely ignored me. Finally, the cops came and arrested the 2 adults that assaulted the guy and talked to everyone. After the police spoke to us, we found out that prawn wasn't all there was to it. Apparently, the old guy at some point cracked the door while he sat on his bed, masturbating in plain view. And one of the kids walked by and reported it to the dad, who became irate. Apparently, this happened right after I spoke to the old guy the second time. The old guy was apparently already on probation, so they ended up taking him in too, when a neighboring room said they saw him in there beating off too, but ignored it. We then officially had both him and the aggressing parents trespassed. Crazy night. We wrote the incident report, which led to a big investigation in which we were each questioned twice. Story 7. I worked at a truck stop motel as a teenager. Several truckers asked if I could help them get a hooker. Some asked me if I was a hooker. One guy tried to get me, and only me, to come to his room to fix his TV and got angry when I refused and offered to send our maintenance guy. He said it had to be me. I was a naive kid, but even my alarm bells were ringing at top notch. I had access to a taser. Police grade, not cheap, don't ask how owner got it, and a maintenance guy that lived at the motel. This was not a place for a teenager to be working. Had a police stakeout there once. A guy had kidnapped a kid and suspected serial rapist. I was not given a name of the guy, so I can't say who. May be able to look it up though if you want that info, DM me. Bunch of kids coming from the Woodstock 99 event that stayed over, and some older man gave me a $20 to help me get out of that place and find a better job. Story 8. So this one isn't as bad as most, but cleaning and cooking a large number of fish in the room on an electric griddle they'd brought in with them. Oil and fish splattered everywhere. They booked 3 rooms for a large extended family, so they were cooking for a dozen or so people. The room reeked of fish for weeks, and no amount of airing it out or scrubbing it down could get all the smell out. Then on top of that, there's a decorative fountain in front of the hotel. They were taking buckets of water from it to wash the cars in the parking lot. There was a car wash down the street, and we had a hose they could have used nearby. Instead, they drained the fountain. I know it's not pedophiles, drugs, or death, but it was still a "what the hell is wrong with you people" moment. Story 9. I was working in the office of this small, locally owned 41-roomed hotel in the city center. There's 3 stories, and we back onto a church car park in the back. We were renovating, so loads of vans and builders walking around out there. The head housekeeper came in looking for the boss. I was alone in the room at 10 a.m. on a Friday. Oh, I thought he'd be looking at the cameras. Why? A cleaner was on the 2nd floor when she saw a man drop from above. She looks down and he's gone. She calls management and they go up to the room. She said she saw him fall from on the 3rd floor. Room is locked. No answer. Master key reveals the door is bolted. They thankfully can get up into the window from outside, with the ladders the builders have. A manager who's skinny enough to fit the window goes up. The rooms have vaulted ceilings, so the windows are tight rectangles that don't open that wide for safety. This window frame is bent, and the window boosted to open fully. Guy crawls in and he usually takes the piss, but his face was still ashen when we talked later. He saw from his angle hair and blood on the bathroom floor. Taking a look, thankfully it was just blood and hair, not a body like he thought. He unbolted the door and let the rest in. The room was lived in, but not even messy. They brought this guy's left behind stuff into my office. Since it has a code and lock on the door only 3 people know. The guy had 1,400 aura on him, and all his cards were still in his bag. We call the police. In the meantime, the receptionist who checked him in last night says she actually remembered him because he was normal. We had a few weirdos in the building that week, but he was polite and had a bit of small talk. The police arrive and ask if he needed to pay for the room or had any fights with people or had any guests. He had paid in full the night before, no guests, and stayed in his room. CCTV showed him sliding out the window, bending the frame and taking a chute with him, landing on a small awning before Batman rolling to the ground and taking off out the pedestrian gate of the churchyard. No builders saw him. The police are stumped since he wasn't dodging a bill or anyone looking for him. I suspected mental health issues. He bolted that door and saw the window as the only way out. He left everything behind in his panic and seemed to pull the hair out of his head. He had a ponytail when he checked in, and we have no sharps in the room to do a haircut, and none was found. He turned out to be local, and his brother went around flyering the area and missing persons posters for him. Last footage in CCTV was him running around by the river 2 seconds away from us. Kept seeing it online too, and about 3 weeks later, his brother announced Ray found his body in the river. He jumped in that morning, but I'd say his body got caught under something and only resurfaced 3 weeks after when he bloated. Very sad ending to a confusing Friday morning. Story 10. Bodily fluids. Either in unusual places or in terrifying amounts. One time it was both unusual and a huge amount of blood, like something is either dead or dying. Amount of blood under the bed. Turns out a guy was not used to wearing sandals and had destroyed his big toe. Too hammered to really feel it or deal with it sensibly, so he improvised. Stuck his foot in the bin and held the bin in place wedged under the bed. Slept on the floor, so he would basically just bleed into the bin was the plan. At some point he rolled over and spilled the mini blood bank, bandaged up his toe as best he could, and checked out in the morning. We only found out what happened as staff were worried he was in danger and had to contact him or the police. He was very apologetic and embarrassed. Even offered to pay for damages, but it was done through insurance. Story 11. I was working at a shady motel, and we had what we nicknamed the Weekend at Bernie's incident. A guy had his dad die in the room, and then proceeded to try to load the body into the passenger seat of his car. He had casual, calm conversations with other guests, telling them, "Yeah, this is my dad. He's dead. And of course, those guests came to us immediately. I had to call the 911. They followed the guy. Turns out he did take the body to a hospital, which makes it even weirder that he didn't just call 911 himself as soon as he found his dad. We had great cameras, so we found out the guy spent a solid 20 minutes wrestling the body into his tiny car. Finally got his dad in, feet on the dashboard like he was chilling. Detectives came and closed off the room as a crime scene for a few hours, but I guess no foul play was found. When the guy came back to collect his stuff from the motel, his first words to our manager was, "What was the breakfast this morning?" Story 12. It was a family retreat kids' birthday party. The adults were getting Schmidt-faced, while the kids were in the presidential suite raising hell. They had decided to have a fully stocked ice cream bar and allowed the kids to do what they wanted with it. M&Ms crushed into the carpet, chocolate footprints on the walls, whipped cream everywhere. Fruit punch spilled on the bed. In total, we had to charge them about $7,000 in damages, which they took to court because they thought the cleanup would be included. That's why we did it at a hotel. They also smashed glass all over our dog hiking trail, which I had to clean up. Story 13. Not in the industry anymore, but one night we had a drunken, violent guest who started shoving staff. Me and another bellman tried to restrain him. Guy was huge, 6'4" about, and heavy. I wound up in a headlock. My coworker was trying to pry his arm off me while pulling him away from the front desk. Lasted 30 seconds. He stopped, started crying. Turns out he spent years in prison before being exonerated. I ended up bringing him water. Police showed up, no injuries, and he was escorted off. 2 weeks later, he tried to reserve a room again. He was denied as they blacklisted him. Also had the FSD start a fire, swept up some trash. Didn't see a still-lit cigarette butt. Placed the dustpan in a closet with it and it caught fire. This was the overnight shift in Jan in NYC. Guess who had to explain to dozens of angry guests in the street? Everything is okay. One that stands out most. Guest died of a heart attack in his room in front of his family. I was the one to go up that night to collect their belongings and assist. Family was devastated. There was still debris left by the paramedics still. I drank hard after work that night. I learned so much from that great industry, but moved on after 13 years. Story 14. I'm no hotel employee, but my mom has been a housemaid at a local hotel for 15 years. And one of the many unexpected and unusual things she has found when opening up that hotel door to do a morning clean was a family room with 2 double beds and 3 single beds, plus a large couch. All of the mattresses and couch cushions removed standing up vertically in a circle in the middle of the living space, as if it was set up as Stonehenge. Upon further inspection of her findings was one used condom right in the middle of mattress henge. Story 15. A man jumped from the 34th floor of an open atrium lobby of a downtown hotel in a successful suicide attempt and landed 6 feet behind me while I was standing my post as a bellman. As a bonus, the body didn't have a head. Story 16. Not my story nor the craziest, but one of my coworkers got a call at the front desk from a room that said their food was stuck in the microwave. The front desk attendant goes up to the room to take a look and help. Turns out, the guest had locked their food in the safe and took a lot of convincing that it was not a microwave. Story 17. Ooh, I have some. I worked as a receptionist at a small hotel. The working hours were 8 nyao, 22 sao. When I was 22 yo, the moments that stand out to me are grandmother was checking in with their granddaughter, about 4 yo, and the little girl peed at the reception. No warning, just stood there and let it go. The grandmother took the keys and walked away without apology. German tourist who left the bathroom covered in It was a woman, probably 50 IO, looked very clean and, according to ID, had a PhD. Man, around 30 yo, got drunk at the hotel restaurant and demanded room for 4 people. He thought that 3 women who sat at the restaurant, and for which he bought a let of drinks, would come to the room with him and sleep with him. He was really angry about it. In the morning, I had to knock on his door several times that he had to leave the room. He opened in only his underwear, asking if I am there to give him his breakfast. I had to ask waiters from the restaurant to get him out. One local woman always booked a room, arrived with a different man, and left the next morning. After her 3rd booking, we found out that she was probably shooting prawn. The rapers and used toys and trash bin were a big hint. Group of 3 women were calling me around midnight, saying someone was trying to break into their room and were demanding me to come and take care of it. I said to call the police, that I would be there in 30 minutes and that would probably be late. Their answer to not come at all. And in the morning, they came downstairs with their husbands and started yelling at me. They actually made me cry, and I was scared to even charge them for breakfast. Drunken hotel guest was leaving the restaurant late in the evening and got into the wrong door and fell down the basement stairs. We had laundry room in the basement, and the door were not being locked so that housekeeping could go there easily with loads of laundry. The door had a sign, "Do not enter" on them. The guest was found in the morning by a housekeeper half dead. He cracked his head on the stairs and died later at the hospital. Story 18. My husband was a GM for 20 years. We lived on property at different hotels around the US. The stories I could tell. You would be surprised how many people die on property. But this is not a death story. At this one property we lived on property. The hotel had a pool. It sat in front of the front desk, but was in a separate room, and there was an open window so you could hear what was happening in there. The front desk person was pregnant, and she needed to go to the doctor. So my husband was covering for her. My kids and I and my in-laws brought lunch, and we were having it in the lobby with my husband. All of a sudden, there was a mother and grandma screaming in Spanish from the pool area hysterically. My father-in-law jumped through the window, and my husband understood the word drowning and called 911. My father-in-law jumped in the pool in all his clothes and drugged the boy out and started CPR. We lived in New Mexico at the time. The ambulance showed up about 3 minutes later. The boy would have died if not for my father-in-law. They took the boy to the hospital. The city gave my father-in-law an award. Story 19, content warning. This is heavy. A man spent the night talking with me and my partner at the time. I worked third shift, and on weekends he would come and sit with me for a few hours overnight so we could have some time together. The man told us a story about how him and his family were having to stay in hotels due to a gang coming for him after he took care of the guy who was abusing his daughter. Both his daughters were with him at the time as well. I sat and talked with them while my partner talked to this man. He kept saying things like, "If I wasn't here, my family wouldn't have to worry anymore. And if a cop shot me dead, I'd be okay with that because bullets don't have names and at least they would be pointing the gun at me." We just listened to him, or his daughters, and he kept thanking us for doing so since no one else seemed to hear him out. He sat and talked with us for hours and eventually went back up to his room with his girls. 30 hours later, that same man walked into our lobby with a gun and told everyone to get out before he shot the place up. He didn't hurt anyone. Even the girl who was working desk that morning said she didn't feel like he was going to hurt her. However, cops shot him dead at the scene. It was the most shocking, heartbreaking things I've ever experienced working in hotels. I tried calling the police department to tell them about the alleged gang coming after the family, but they never did anything about it. I don't know where those girls are, but I remember talking to them about New York and how much they wanted to live there one day. I really hope they eventually got there and were able to find some much-needed healing. Story 20. I was working at a low-budget motel in a ski town. My shifts consisted of mundane tasks like changing light bulbs, fixing clogs, etc., etc. I got a call from one of the maids to come to a room because the lighting is weird. I asked her to expand on that, and she said that the room just looked strange. Okay. I arrived at the room, and sure enough, with the lights on and the curtains closed, the room was bathed in a weird yellow glow. I look up at the ceiling light, expecting that the bulb is underpowered, or the fixture is shorting out, and instead find that the glass globe surrounding the bulb is filled right to the brim with piss. Someone actually unscrewed the 3 screws holding it up, peed in the globe, and I imagine carefully put it back. The worst part was that the bulb had actually been submerged in piss and had warmed it back up. TL Dr. Mann changes the mood lighting of his accommodation with urine. Story 21. Hotels always have perverts who ring them up, usually the reception, all through the night. We had at least 3 who rang every night, usually saying they were watching us through the window. They had been one of the customers that day and could still smell our perfume or had seen our eye color, saying they would follow us home after our shift, asking for color of underwear, or describing what they were doing. It all gets a bit boring after a while, TBH, but for the first month, I was petrified. We also had a guy who was OCD and would check in every week, then call down within an hour for the manager or room service. He had a pair of white gloves and would go over the whole room until he found dust, then complain. It was part of some kink he had, but as a paying customer, we couldn't refuse. Story 22. A woman had checked in near 11 p.m. and later reported that her shower curtain had fell off. We asked her to wait in the lobby so maintenance could do a quick fix. She had a blanket stretched out on a couch, and we got back into the routine. Time passed, and as we went to tell her it was set, but she was missing. We figured she'd make it back to her room, and the shift changed, and someone asked if they saw the blanket outside. I answered no, and the auditor said she'd look as there's an iron gate, the rain from the lot to a deep valley below. The poor auditor found her hanging there in the pre-dawn darkness. It was horrible. She never recovered from the sight. Story 23. I work in a hotel, older style. Had a couple of check-in one night. No proper ID and no reservation. My GM rented them a room anyways because they were older and didn't seem like trouble. Well, it turns out they were somewhat on the run from their family. and had been erratic with them on the phone. The family was deeply concerned about their well-being. The police came by looking for them one evening while I was working. They needed me to get access to the room should they not open the door. So I went to the room with the officers. A do not disturb sign hung on the knob. Housekeeping had mentioned they refused room cleaning for a couple days. I could hear a TV playing in the room. I knocked and announced myself and the police. A lady's voice from inside said, "Oh, we're okay. No need to bother." I stated that I would open the door as the police need to see you. "Oh, okay," said the woman. I opened the door slowly and we got hit with the smell. Inside the room was a barely dressed old lady sitting in a chair in front of the TV. Next to the bed, sprawled out on the floor, was her male companion, bloated and purple with death. He had been dead a few days, while the lady just watched TV in a daze. Police took her away without issues, and took the body as well. I've never heard an official word on what happened, but from my understanding, the couple had planned some sort of suicide pact, and had alluded to this to the poor family trying to find them. Story 24. Not a hotel employee at the time, but my wife and I stayed at a strange hotel with our kids. While traveling across the US, we got into our room and started to unpack a few things when I dropped something on the floor and it went under the bed. When I got down to pick it up, I noticed a line going around the walls of the room, about 4 or 5 inches above floor level. I started looking around the entire room and realized it was black mold. Apparently, the room had experienced flooding, and they didn't bother to remove the damaged drywall. They just painted over it, and the mold kept spreading and growing. I told my wife, and she said, "We need to get another room," to which I agreed. We were given a second room, and when we went into the room, there was a large hole in the ceiling. It was big enough for an adult to fit through, and we could see the ceiling joists with the lights on in the room. So I went back to the front desk and they gave us another room at the other end of the building on the second floor that was much better. We had planned to stay in this hotel for a few days, but changed our plans and left the next morning. Story 25. Hunters cleaning out their deer in the bathtub, leaving the guts and blood all over the bathroom. I grew up hunting. Why they wouldn't take care of it after they've killed the animal is beyond me. Hell of a lot lighter to move after it's been cleaned. Story 26. Couple in their late 20s came in. Clean. No tattoos or needle marks. Next morning, the man came in and turned the key. He said his wife took the car, and he was waiting for a ride and would be gone shortly. When I went in to check the room, it was a bloodbath. Childbirth blood. Stuff was even on the ceiling fan. It stunk like hell. Owner's wife had been a midwife in a foreign country, and I called her in. She checked everything and never once mentioned childbirth. Pulled the sheets off to peroxide and soaked them, and one pillowcase was missing. We will never know whether that baby was carried out dead or alive. It's been over 7 years. The carpets have been cleaned regularly, and occasionally I can still get a whiff of that horror. Story 27. Worked in hotel industry for a few years. Worst thing girl passed out naked in the communal games room. She wasn't a guest. Someone brought her back and they left her there. This was a family hostel. Some dad and his kid went in there in the morning to play a game of pool and found her. More recently, a couple cracked out of their minds. The room was a wreck. Made me heave cause the smell was so bad and they wouldn't leave. Had to get maintenance workers in to vet them out. Also, while cleaning a room a few years back, found someone vomited in the bedside drawers and made no attempt to sort it out. Story 28. I used to work at a resort that was popular with elderly people. They'd often come on coach holidays and basically sit around, eat, and drink. Most years, at least 2 or 3 people would die, either from a heart attack or pass in their sleep. The worst was when people would fall over, usually bang their heads and die from that injury while spreading blood everywhere from their wound. While a sad occurrence, it was also a messy one that take time to clean. We also had a story that one lady came, ate so much that she spilt one of her digestive organs in her sleep and died from it. The bed she was sleeping on was covered in bodily fluids, which leaked from her butt, and her body had deflated. I don't know if the story is true, but it's one that everyone at the resort knew. In the summer, we'd have younger people in who would drink and often fight. Lots of people cutting themselves on glass. The resort was next to a beach where they'd go skinny dipping. And yes, one time, someone went for a midnight swim and didn't come back. Story 29. I worked in the pool and had a guy come up to me and said someone Schmidt in the change room. Sure as Schmidt, there was a massive soft turd on the floor, 2 feet away from the toilet, and I had to clean it up. Some people are disgusting assholes. Story 30. There's a list as long as my arm of things I've witnessed. One thing that sticks out was this woman who checked in. A few minutes later, she comes down to reception as her bathroom light wasn't working. I told her I'd be up to change it, but she said she had to pop out, so if she's not in there to let myself in. I find a spare bulb and go and knock on her door. Silence. Knocked again. Nothing. So I let myself in. I walk into the room to see her completely naked, with about 12 guys, also naked, wanking over her. I froze in my steps. She looks right at me and says, "You joining us?" I didn't. Story 31. We found a young kid wandering around the holodome, naked. We were able to get enough info from him to locate what room he was in. Knocked on the door. No response. We opened the door, and his mom was passed out on the bed, naked. A big hole burned in the middle of the carpet, trash and empty vodka bottles everywhere. We called in the police, and come to find out, her husband had been beating her, and she grabbed the kid and ran. Came and got a room, got drunk, and passed out. The kid got bored and was able to get the door open and went on a little adventure. CPS was able to find her shelter, counseling, and she was able to keep her kid. Story 32. Worked at a small boutique hotel in NW Portland. Husband and wife in their 70s came in. He made a joke about how many homeless people he'd have to kick on his way to their event. He was a retired cop from Southern Oregon. Well, they check out no problem the next day. About an hour after, check out the wife calls and asked me to check their room for her Kindle and brooch. I go up there, doors open for housekeeping. Sure enough, I see her brooch and Kindle, and then on the bedside table is a handgun. Safety off. I call my manager up and he puts on the safety, luckily has gun control knowledge, and puts it in a safe in our back office until they can come back to pick it up. Story 33. Years ago, worked in a hotel, and we'd have amateur wrestlers stay over the weekends once in a while. They'd be in town for whatever show they were involved in. It was a mix of mostly men and a few women. Late on a Saturday night, we hear random noises coming from a conference room across from our front desk area. So I go to investigate, only to walk in on 4 dudes and 2 women having a free-for-all with each other. Not sure if they saw me, as I immediately stepped back out into the hallway, closing the door, and yelled through the door that we had a noise complaint and needed them to leave and go to their rooms. I worked the next morning, and needless to say, checking them out was awkward as F. Story 34. Well, taking your question literally, I got shocked pretty bad on a screw with exposed metal on a switch panel after I got out of the shower, so wet with no shoes on. Had hotel maintenance come out because they didn't believe me, which made me pretty pissed. Dude touches it wearing his insulated boots and goes, "I don't feel anything," and I'm like, "Bro, take your boots off and touch it. I assure you, I know more about electrical work than you." He indulges me and can't take it for more than a fraction of a second and goes, "Oh, Schmidt, yeah, that's pretty spicy." Dude still proceeds to act like an asshole because he thought I was trying to get some free Schmidt. Well, I did. A free trip to the local emergent care facility for an EKG. That guy, though, what an arrogant prick. Been zapped plenty of times, but wanted the hotel to pay for its negligence. Story 35. Had a long-term guest who would only drink water from the kitchen faucet. It was safer than the other water in the house. She would fill up a large container in the morning. One morning, she came for breakfast, dropped her bags, and ran outside. A city work crew was digging up the road, and she accused them of tampering with the water. She was very loud and angry. I tried to bring her inside, but eventually the cops came and arrested her. She was in the kitchen the next morning, getting water for her day. I didn't ask. Story 36. Posted this on the last one, but worked at a hotel front desk third shift, and an old, maybe 75-plus lady called the front desk and wanted a pillow delivered to her room. I took the pillow. When I got there, she wanted me to come inside. I'm like, nah, here's your pillow, she insisted, so I did. I get inside, she shuts the door and tells me to put the pillow on the bed. She then goes to a drawer in her dresser. At this time, I'm like, I need to return to the front desk, thinking the worst. She then pulls out a thing of Band-Aids and wants me to put Band-Aids on her open sores on her feet. I noped on out of there as fast as I could and left before she came down for morning breakfast. Still freaks me out. Yuck, pre-feet finder era. Story 37. Once I was doing my rounds and I saw a dude shaking his bare ass wildly at people passing by from his hotel room. He was also calling Kex hotlines, and the front desk reported it to me. I mean, an ass shaking, that's quite fast and disturbing. He was wearing only a black shiny jock jacket. I passed by his hotel room and saw him shake his ass at me. He did that anytime someone walked by. We called his room to tell him we saw some inappropriate things and calls to Kex hotline. When I walked by again, he came outside with pants and shirtless under the black jock jacket to smoke outside. I stayed the hell away. Clearly, this dude was on some heavy drugs. Probably crank or something of that nature. Other than that bunch of 20-something kids smoking pot and Karen's angry that the pool closes early. Story 38. I worked at a travel lodge in the 90s. We had one of those covered curved driveways in front of the hotel where people parked before they came in to check in or out. One burly, manly man would come in every so often. I worked the 2OP, 11OP shift. He would go into his room, put on a pink tutu ballerina outfit, headpiece, ballet flats, and when nobody was out front, he would dance ballet. He was good, but it was odd to see his big beer belly and bearded tutu wearing guy doing pirouettes. We also had a married couple, not to each other, come in once a week. My coworker told me they had been coming to the hotel for years. In hindsight, I was 20 and would work my shifts alone until the next person arrived. That was an unsafe job for me. Story 39. My dad was the head cook at a fancy hotel in Los Angeles for 36 years. Every year, he would take his 3-week vacation right after the 4th of July, except for 2 years. Back in the mid-90s, he took it in April because of a family emergency, and the other was because one of his employees blew his brains out in one of the rooms. I believe this was mid-March, back in 2003. He didn't want to be at work, so he was given time off, and he just rolled it into vacation time. I didn't know this is why he took so much time off until he officially retired in 2020. One of the maids who had worked there as long as him told me at his retirement party. Story 40. Woman killed her baby and was walking around the lobby with its corpse. She had it wrapped up, so we didn't know. Usually the baby was screaming its head off, but was silent now. We found out the next morning what really happened. The husband was very upset. The woman was arrested. Story 41. A customer having a dementia-related fit. Due to rules, I would have had to call the police to remove him. I actually would have felt bad for the police. That old man belonged in a nursing home. Thankfully, the customer's wife grabbed him and took him outside. Story 42. At the hotel's restaurant knee, one of the guests wanted their leftovers to go, so I placed the plates of food in the kitchen while I went to search for the to-go boxes. When I came back with the boxes, the food was literally gone. And when I looked in the dustbin, lo and behold, someone had thrown it away. Safe to say, I was pretty scared since I would have to take full responsibility for the food. So I quickly asked for help from my manager, who picked the food out from the garbage bin and placed it in the to-go box and told me to give it to the guest. From that day on, I've never really trusted restaurants and hotels anymore. It was a 5-star hotel too, so. Story 43. My friend worked at a hotel where the Packers would stay when they came to Minnesota. If you could imagine, Aaron Rodgers was a total douchebag who would cuss out the minimum wage workers if his fruit smoothies weren't good enough. Story 44. I've been a maid both inside the hotel industry and out on my own. I've walked into countless destroyed hotel rooms in that time frame. But the craziest was when I walked in on a guy tied up on the bed, in his birthday suit, of course. Couldn't believe it. Story 45. Friend used to run a small B&B and she had a couple of guests. M&F check in separately. They claimed to be strangers. It was apparently clear from the start that they knew each other, or that they arranged a meetup under a pretense. The following day after they left, she found the gentleman's room nearly untouched, and the ladies' room had a big poo wrapped in a towel on a bathroom floor. Story 46. Had a friend who was the manager of a Days Inn. She said that at least 3-4 times a year, a customer checks into the hotel just to kill themselves. They figure, if they kill themselves in the hotel, then their kids don't have to find them dead at home. But those poor housekeepers who find you dead? Yeah, duck them, am I right? Story 47. Once worked night audit at a hotel. Went up to check a noise complaint, and after I was done, returned to the elevator and the damn SWAT team poured out of it. Apparently someone had called in reporting someone had a gun. As far as I know, no one had a gun. Story 48. A friend of my aunt is a cleaning lady at the hotel she works at. One time, she had to clean a room, and when she opened the door, she was greeted by a big snake. Turns out the 2 dudes staying there had a python with them and didn't mention anything to the hotel staff and just went out visiting the city. Story 49. I was on minibar duty at this hotel that attracted a lot of older people. I went into one room after knocking and it was pitch black, so I couldn't see where to put the key card to turn the lights on. So I instead went to the other side of the room to open the curtains. I turn around and there's someone under the bed covers. All I'm thinking is, please don't be dead, please don't be dead. So I pulled down the top of the cover, and it was a blow-up doll. Guy was paying $200 a night to his doll in a fancy hotel. Story 50. A large group of mostly Germans stayed in the conference hotel for a couple weeks and drove the staff nuts. I'm assuming they were part of a cult. There was water damage all over the place because they insisted on cleansing a bunch of upholstered furniture. They locked the conference room doors, and staff weren't allowed in. But I heard a rumor that they were bowing to a plastic statue of an alien. They refused to eat anything that was microwaved. And worst of all, they didn't tip. Story 51. Full-service hotel that had a presidential suite in it with giant windows overlooking the indoor pool and hot tub in the lobby. A couple on their honeymoon decided to have keks up against those giant uncovered windows overlooking the pool as parents were frantically covering their kids' eyes. They never rented that suite out again. Story 52. Used to be a luxury hotel manager. I went 8 years without seeing a body. My last month in the industry, doors locked, guest won't answer, go up with security and open the door and find him in the tub. Blood everywhere in the bathroom and bedroom. Guy was getting divorced and had to sell his business to cover costs to the ex. He couldn't handle it anymore and partied for 2 nights before ending it. Was definitely the worst experience of my life in hotels. Story 53. Dude came back from his fast food trip and bumped into the wall which caused him to spill half of his drink. So he got angry and just threw the whole large drink on the other side of the wall in front of us. Ilmao screamed and walked back to his room afterwards. Story 54. Cleaning rooms one summer entered checkout. Guest's bathroom and noticed rolled up towels on the floor. Pretty common. I start picking them up, hidden underneath a pile of human schmidt. I open the shower curtain as I begin to smell an overpowering stench of schmidt. I find at least 10 dumps in the shower, mixed with piss. The toilet, clean. Doesn't look like it was even used. I quit that day. Story 55. Former housekeeper here. Most shocking, seeing a dead man in the bathtub. He was in his 50s and died of a heart attack. That room is said to be haunted now. Least shocking, accidentally walking in on a couple having keks, LOL. They didn't have the do not disturb sign, and we usually go in after 3 knocks when there is no answer. Story 56. I worked reception at a historical hotel in a small town. One day, a lady walked into the lobby, pulled down her pants, sat in one of our plush lobby chairs, relieved herself as if on the toilet, then stood up and walked out, all less than 10 feet away from where I was sitting at the reception desk. Story 57. Not me, but my father and my mother's mom worked at a hotel in Florida. They had found an ounce of weed and crack bundles lying in the head of a toilet. Lucky for them, my grandmother was a crackhead, and my dad was a major smoker, so they got blitzed out of their minds. I think my dad was 17, 18 at the time. This was also the late 90s. Story 58. Jizz on practically every surface, including the ceiling, a fishing tackle box full of near 30 different strains of weed and pills, 2 brand new unlocked iPhones filled to max capacity with hairy bush prawn, a large duffel bag filled with dildos of varying sizes and colors. This was one room and the one guest. Blacklighting the room may have been a mistake. Story 59. A guy walked into a room that housekeeping was freshening up and climbed into bed. Housekeeping staff assumed he was the man staying in that room and left. Safe to say, the guest was very displeased to find a random man sleeping in their hotel room bed and called 911. Police ended up arresting the random guy, as he had attempted to steal the man's watch and other belongings. Story 60. We have a bar and restaurant in our hotel, and one time a dude who had been drinking since 8 a.m. got so drunk he threw up on the bar, and then punched a guy, blaming him for throwing up on the bar, trying to defend the bartender from a predator. Cops took him to jail, and we banned him from entering the hotel again. Story 61. I had a seemingly normal-looking guy in his maybe late 20s claim we had a prostitute ring going on, and that we needed to do room checks on every guest to look for a candy fox he had been messaging and sending money to on WhatsApp. The weirdest thing is he never asked for a refund or for us to give him his money back. Story 62. My mother worked in a long-term motel. One of the tenants was shot by a police officer when he pulled a gun on them. When they went into his place, they found a blow-up doll on the bed and a complete wardrobe for her in the closet. Story 63. One time, I walked in on a guest pleasuring themselves with a stuffed animal in their room. It was definitely a shocking and awkward moment for both of us. I quickly apologized and made a hasty exit. Definitely not something you expect to see while working at a hotel. Story 64. Worked at a luxury hotel for about 5 years, and you can't even imagine half of the stuff I saw. One high-profile guest would order not 1, not 2, but 10 baskets of fruit to their suite every day. Then the next morning, housekeeping would find them all untouched. Literally just had 10 baskets of fruit sitting there for no reason. Story 65. Watched a guy on the 14th floor jump off the balcony, holding onto a rope made from tied-together sheets. He stole off a housekeeping cart, swing back onto the 11th floor, completely shattering his legs, face, and many other body parts. He proceeded this by throwing furniture off the balcony into the pool below. Story 66. High-strung cook had an argument with A-type bistro attendant. It just kept escalating to a pull-apart brawl when a kitchen knife got involved. The pair crashed through the swinging door and was rolling on the carpet when the regional manager just happened to be walking in. Cops were called. I think both got fired or arrested. Story 67. Not me, but I overnight desk, and I came in the morning at a boutique place. At 3 a.m., a guy turned on his hairdryer and was frightened by it. He thought it would light on fire if it stayed on, so he called 911, didn't tell the front desk. Story 68. Former night auditor here. I caught another employee in the hotel in the middle of the night with a guest. She talked her way out of it, until 6 months later, they had to fire her for theft, and then she was arrested at another hotel for more theft.